Hello and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I'm producing covering the various deities, factions, and NPCs in the Pathfinder role-playing game, and its setting, the world of Golarion. This month here on Pathfinder, I've been shining the spotlight on an underexplored aspect of Pathfinder's lore, the gods of Dragonkind. I started about 2 months ago by covering the Age of Ashes adventure path, then focused in my last video on the two most prominent draconic deities, the patriarchal Apsu and his wayward son Deific. Today I'm going to cover the remaining 7 draconic deities, giving you all the information we have on these new gods. We don't have a lot to go on with most of these deities, but I think I owe it to the fantastic writers of the Draconic Codex to show off the incredible work that they've done. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. Or, if you want to support the channel directly, check out my Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you access to all my scripts, as well as the audio files for all my scripted videos, all of which drop at least a week early. With that out of the way, let's move on to Video Overview and Shared Deific Qualities. Well, that's a fun section title. Alright, so what does this video actually look like? I'm covering the remaining 7 gods in the following order. Sarshallatu, the matriarch and god of creation. Gaasham, the second son and replacement for Deific. Brixori, the ever-scheming occultist daughter. Garhaazh, the vicious primal bully. Yluma, the ever-evolving arcane font. Turvu, the draconic exploration of divinity. And finally, Otilaz, the son who would never be. There is a limited amount of lore beyond that which I've already examined in my video on Apsu and Deific, but I want to give those added lore tidbits their due. This video is definitely a sequel to my previous coverage of Apsu and Deific, so make sure you've seen that one first, or you might get a little lost. After I cover the specific lore surrounding each deity, I will then move on to their mechanics, covering their edicts and anathema, as well as their favored weapons, animals, colors, etc. Then I'll conclude each section by making ancestry, class, and archetype suggestions for characters thematically aligned with those deities. That being said, there is one obvious area of overlap between all these deities. They're dragons, meaning all characters with a connection to Dragonkind might be drawn to their faith. So, rather than list the draconic character options out 7 times as I cover each deity, I'm just going to review them all up front. This would broadly apply to all the deities I discuss in this video, but the specifics may vary. For instance, characters whose powers come from a sage dragon might have innate academic tendencies which align with the teachings of Brixori, but might not be especially aligned with the more brutish teachings of Garhaazh. To accommodate this, as I discuss each deity, I will also propose several draconic subtypes which would naturally align with that deity's teachings and worldview. Those dragons, then, could be thematic sources of draconic power for characters aligned with that deity. So, what are these shared character options? Starting off with ancestries, the Dragonette ancestry from Draconic Codex is a great fit for a character aligned with any of the draconic gods. Dragonettes come in a variety of flavors, so really you could do a lot with them from a narrative standpoint. Similarly, kobolds, and specifically kobolds who align with a draconic benefactor, have a strong ancestral connection to Dragonkind, and some kobolds even have creation myths relating back to draconic deities, and specifically Deific. Kobolds are extremely likely to follow the same deity as their benefactor, and plenty of dragons worship the draconic deities. Lastly, the Dragonblood versatile heritage can be applied to essentially any ancestry, tying any character back to some draconic ancestor. Moving over to the classes, there are 2 options to note. First, the Draconic Sorcerer is probably the most obvious option to explore. The Draconic bloodline has been expanded in the Draconic Codex to include all the new dragon subtypes, essentially creating 48 mini-bloodlines to choose from. As another option, the summoner has access to the Dragon Eidolon, and this will likely be reworked in the upcoming Impossible Magic rulebook. I wouldn't be surprised if the remastered Dragon Summoner had options divided out among either the 4 magical traditions, or, ideally, the 48 existing dragon subtypes. Looking at the archetypes which could be applicable to all draconic deities, there are two which stand out. The Draconic Acolyte is the first option, as it represents a character who manifests draconic power through the gift of some draconic patron. The Drake Rider is a little more removed from dragons specifically, but does have at least a superficial connection. Again, these are the options which would be thematic for followers of any of these draconic deities, so I won't be covering these for every deity hereafter. Just keep these in mind as we move forward. Alright, with that prelude out of the way, let's dig in. Sarshallatu, the Thundering Song. Before time, there was Sarshallatu, a shapeless goddess of creation. She existed in all things, for all was of Sarshallatu. She delighted in the making of things, and created reality as an exercise in creativity. As she created, she grew, pushing herself and her creations in new and interesting directions. And as she created, she noticed that there was no change, and for the first time, she perceived the idea of loneliness. Then, at the edges of herself, she sensed something else, something which was not Sarshallatu. Curious and eager, she explored this new thing, and in so doing accepted a limitation on herself, for something which was not of Sarshallatu had never been before this. This new thing would be Apsu, and he would become Sarshallatu's mate. They would spend eons together, basking in each other's glory, and creating the great beyond. But, for all the new joys she felt, Sarshallatu had already sown the seeds of her own doom. In accepting something beyond herself, Sarshallatu changed, and became finite, a limited and quantifiable thing who no longer controlled all that she perceived. She had made herself lesser in the name of companionship and love, imposing limits upon herself which were now beyond her control. And Apsu brought with him the most magnificent and terrible limitation of all: time. The things which Apsu and Sarshallatu created now experienced the flow of time, and with that came the capacity for, and the inevitability of, change. From then on, nothing Sarshallatu had created would remain as she had made it, for even the seemingly static mountains wore away over time. All this change and decay brought Sarshallatu tremendous grief, but she told herself that the new joys in her life made up for them. Sarshallatu and Apsu produced a clutch of eggs, and from these hatched something new, a family. This new joy was greater than she could have imagined, and the passage of time allowed this joy to remain in the form of pleasant memories. For a time, existence seemed good. Then came the terrible day when Apsu and Deific broke everything. Deific, in his fury, slaughtered his siblings, hatched and unhatched alike, smashing even the near-born Otilaz upon his father's skull. In retribution, Apsu wrestled his traitorous son to the ground, then raised one divine claw to strike him down forever. But Sarshallatu, overcome with a grief she didn't know she could feel, cried out. She would not suffer the death of her firstborn son, could not suffer the loss even after his terrible atrocities. She summoned her power and hid Deific away in the hearts of all mortal dragons, ensuring that Apsu could never kill him. Then she let out a wail of agony, the likes of which shook the very foundations of reality. She fled her home, leaving her family behind. Apsu, her once mate and the father of her children, had failed her. Sarshallatu found the farthest, quietest corner of reality, and settled in to process her grief. In the eons since, she came to realize a terrible thing. She herself bore some responsibility for the tragedies which now befell her. Had she remained infinite and boundless, had she not made herself lesser, she would have avoided all this pain and misery. But, in changing, she had allowed herself to feel new joys. Even these joys, though, were tainted with imperfection, as her beloved children were lesser beings. They squabbled and fought, bringing one another down. Worst of all was the betrayal of Deific, but even her few surviving children continued to tear one another down. In the face of this tremendous irony, joy which brought sorrow, relief which brought grief, and self-awareness which brought regret, Sarshallatu felt compelled to laugh. Her laughter echoed across the great beyond, letting all of existence know her lamentations. But in the end, would she undo her decision? Would she truly give up all the joys she'd experienced in exchange for the pain she now felt? Even today, none but Sarshallatu herself can say. If you'll forgive a little editorializing for a moment, I really like Sarshallatu's story. It reminds me of The Awakening by Kate Chopin, a tragic tale of feminist liberation which paints the heroine in a sympathetic but ultimately doomed light. I was pleasantly surprised by how much this departed from the previous iterations in the lore, in which the matriarchal Tiamat became an explicit villain. Sarshallatu is a much more complex and therefore compelling character. Thinking about the relationships Sarshallatu might have with other deities, she's in an interesting position. She generally isolates herself from others, at least based on what we know, but has been approached by at least one of her children. Of her offspring, she seems to have the closest relationship with Yluma, whom she taught to control her inherent arcane power. I suspect she also has a good relationship with Turvu, whose goal is to grow, learn, and change according to their own desires. Looking outside the Draconic pantheon, I believe that Sarshallatu would have a complex relationship with Naderi, the goddess of tragic love. Naderi would likely seek to befriend Sarshallatu and understand her pain. I'm not entirely sure how Sarshallatu would respond to these advances. She might rebuff any attempts at friendship, but could just as easily recognize Naderi's earnestness and good intentions. At my table, I would probably lean into a slowly burgeoning friendship between the two goddesses. I could also see both Shizuru and Skio having a complicated relationship with Sarshallatu. Both the Empress of Heaven and the Prince of the Moon have aspects of themselves which are draconic in nature, and their relationship has been forever changed by the death and resurrection of Skio. While they did not impose these changes upon themselves, they are now struggling to accept the consequences of them, and each deity individually might find value in sharing their perspectives with Sarshallatu and hearing her feedback. I also like the idea of Shizuru acting as something of an intermediary between Sarshallatu and Apsu. These relationships are based on a lot of interpretation and interpolation on my part, but I think they make a lot of sense. For players interested in playing characters who follow Sarshallatu, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Sarshallatu never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. Her edicts are to feel privileged to witness the wonders of creation, to find value in being, and to change to better know yourself. Conversely, to change yourself for another, to be consumed by temporary things, or to let others define your soul are all anathema to Sarshallatu. Her domains are creation, dragon, fate, and time, and she has a whopping 4 alternate domains: knowledge, magic, sorrow, and star. Clerics of Sarshallatu can choose the heal or harm fonts. Clerics and champions may choose either holy or unholy sanctification, but are not required to do so. Her holy symbol is a sunburst made from serpentine shapes. Of the many dragons on Golarion, time dragons likely possess a strong innate draw towards Sarshallatu's faith. Though Apsu was the god who brought time into existence, Sarshallatu allowed herself to be bound by time, a feeling which the time dragons might share. Requiem dragons take a unique view on the cycle of life and death, which Sarshallatu herself might find relatable, due to her experiences with her son Otilaz, and the death of her many children at the hands of Deific. Lastly, wish dragons spend much of their lives attempting to understand and appreciate the world around them, so they might choose who they want to be and how they want to use their incredible wish-granting powers. This search for meaning and understanding aligns nicely with Sarshallatu's teachings. These dragons, Time, Requiem, and Wish, might be ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Sarshallatu. Sarshallatu has no listed sacred colors, so followers might dress in any way they choose. The Thundering Song herself is depicted with a black body surrounded by a series of strange, undulating golden halos, and I really like this black and gold color scheme. It's not official, but I would dress followers of Sarshallatu in black garments, with polished gold holy symbols and other star or halo-themed golden accessories. Sarshallatu's favored weapons are the jaws or the sling, which are certainly an interesting mix. The sling doesn't have a ton of support in 2e yet, so here's hoping it gets some unique style feats or other support, maybe in a future halfling-focused book. Sarshallatu has a fun favored animal entry. All. Any animal is her favored animal, likely due to her edict regarding the beauties of creation. This might imply that familiars or animal companions are exceptionally common among her followers, and even followers who don't use these mechanical options might take the pet feat. I don't see any particular ancestries or heritages which might be drawn to the faith of Sarshallatu, outside of the options I listed at the beginning of the video. That said, the strong themes of feminism in Sarshallatu's story might imply that women are drawn to her faith in greater numbers than men, at least in the parts of Golarion where patriarchal systems hold some sway. Parents also might feel common ground with Sarshallatu, especially those who have a strained relationship with their children. Looking at the classes which might align nicely with Sarshallatu's teachings, I believe that cloistered clerics would be the most common doctrine among Sarshallatu's dedicated priests. Her emphasis on introspection and self-examination lends itself to a more peaceful lifestyle, and none of her edicts relate directly to combat. For that same reason, I suspect that champions of Sarshallatu are exceptionally rare. Oracles with the time and cosmos mysteries are likely prominent among the followers of the Thundering Song, since they align with the aspect of space and time in her backstory. The Choir Politic, Paradox of Opposites, and Starless Shadow Witch patrons all align with different aspects of Sarshallatu's story and her teachings, and Witch's familiars align with her affection for all animals. Lastly, the Echo of Lost Moments apparition, for the Animist, calls to mind Sarshallatu's memories of the joy and grief throughout her life. Moving on to archetypes, both the Chronoskimmer and the Time Mage would grant characters access to time manipulation powers, skills which might be of interest to Sarshallatu and her faithful, given how the passage of time was imposed upon her through her acceptance of Apsu. On the other end of the spectrum, the Familiar Master, Familiar Sage, and Beastmaster archetypes could grant characters access to familiars or animal companions, aligning with Sarshallatu's appreciation for animals of all kinds. Gaasham, the Architect. Gaasham was the second egg produced from Apsu and Sarshallatu's clutch, but unlike many of his siblings, he was not eager to hatch. A being of patient observation and careful planning, Gaasham was still unhatched when his traitorous brother, Deific, rampaged throughout his familial home, slaughtering his brothers and sisters and smashing most of the remaining unhatched eggs. That Gaasham survived ultimately came down to luck. Gaasham, though, heard all the horrors which were taking place outside the safe confines of his egg, and this terrible violence instilled in him a great fear. Long did he cower in his egg from the dangers which awaited him. When he finally hatched, Apsu looked upon his son with pity and severity. Gaasham, the second son, had been intended as the architect, a careful builder and planner, intended to guide mortals as they build great works. Instead, he would need to take his wayward brother's place at Apsu's side, becoming a guide and protector for all of creation. For his part, Gaasham saw the path which had been laid out for him, and he resigned himself to his fate. He took up the position of his father's right hand, tempering his innate caution and care with a sense of duty and responsibility. He views himself even today as a usurper to his brother's position, and, in that, believes that he and all his great works are doomed to a terrible fate. Still, he remains resolute in the face of what he believes is a certain doom. That a project must be brought to ruin is not a reason to avoid completing it. On Golarion, Gaasham's faith first rose to prominence in the bygone days of Nin Shabur in Khazmaran, and in the Cyclops civilization of Old Coloran. These ancient cultures interpreted Gaasham as a deity of construction and architecture, and offered praises to him as they constructed their great temples, pyramids, and ziggurats. In the modern day, his faith has mostly fallen by the wayside. Some dragons, and several subgroups of dragonettes, now view him as a deity of self-perfection and ceaseless hard work. Given how limited Gaasham's reach on Golarion is today, he likely has very few interactions with other deities. His closest alliance is still with his father, Apsu, whom he continues to serve with resigned loyalty. He doesn't appear to have an especially close relationship with any of his siblings, though he likely remains afraid of Deific even today. I would be curious to see if Gaasham will join his father in the final battle with Deific and his forces, since I really can't tell where Paizo intends his story to go. Outside of the Draconic pantheon, I could see Gaasham having a close friendship with Alseta, the elven goddess of gates, defenses, transitions, and the Ayudara. Both have a focus on architecture, and both encourage their followers to aid others in their personal growth. I could also see Gaasham getting along well with Abadar, though his fatalism might irritate the Master of the First Vault over time. Uirk, the bulwark god of the orcs, places a strong emphasis on the construction of defensive works, and the advancement of society, both ideas which aligned with Gaasham's teachings. And, of course, many of the deities of the Dwarven pantheon have parallels to Gaasham and his ideals. Torag, Magrim, and Bolka all share domains with Gaasham, and Avestani Dwarven culture places substantial emphasis on hard work, construction, and decisive action. For players interested in playing characters who follow Gaasham, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Gaasham never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. His edicts are to build when it is asked of you, to foster growth in others, and to meditate upon your actions. Conversely, to act without thinking, to hesitate in the face of destructive forces, and to refuse to change your ways are all anathema to Gaasham. His domains are cities, creation, dragon, and toil, and he has the alternate domains of change and perfection. His divine font is heal, and clerics and champions of Gaasham can choose holy sanctification, but are not required to do so. His holy symbol is a bronze dragon egg, with a line of green splashed across the shell. Of the many dragons on Golarion, Executor and Imperial dragons are likely the most inherently aligned with Gaasham's teachings. Both these dragon subtypes would serve Apsu in large numbers, and plenty of them might similarly serve his son Gaasham. Vizier dragons would align closely with Gaasham's emphasis on fostering growth in others, meaning they might be drawn to his faith. Similarly, Oath dragons might witness the architect's unfailing devotion to his father, and see in him an idealized version of the oaths they swear. Accordingly, they might become his agents on Golarion. These dragons, Executor, Imperial, Vizier, and Oath, might be ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Gaasham. Gaasham's sacred colors are bronze, eggshell, and teal. I really like this color scheme, and I might build a follower of Gaasham just so I can use these colors in Hero Forge. Given his emphasis on hard work and construction, a field which requires strength and endurance, I suspect that heavy armor and strength-based fighting styles are more common among his followers than light armor and dex-based ones. For that reason, followers might wear armor decorated with bronze and teal or eggshell enameled inlay. That said, these colors are just as easily woven into fabrics. Regardless, followers might tend toward armor and clothing styles which are antiquated or historically inspired, drawing back to Gaasham's prominence in ancient civilizations. Gaasham's favored weapons are the Jaws and the Lighthammer. The Lighthammer is entirely consistent with his teachings surrounding the construction of great buildings, and other weapons in the Hammer group might just as easily be used by the followers of the Architect. This is another trait which Gaasham shares with many dwarven gods. Gaasham's favored animal is the draft lizard, a reptilian beast of burden which would have aided in construction projects. Other animals which fill similar roles, like horses, mules, oxen, and regional creatures like the Augdunar in the Five Kings Mountains, might all be employed by his followers. I could see dwarves being especially drawn to the faith of Gaasham, both the dwarves of Avestan and, to a lesser extent, the Donguni dwarves of Garund. Gaasham already shares many of the cultural ideals which these dwarves espouse: hard work, self-improvement, and the importance of construction, among others. Dwarves would also wield the Lighthammer and tend toward heavy armor, meaning many wouldn't need to change their martial practices to fit into Gaasham's faith. Planar scions aligned with earth and metal might also be especially prominent among Gaasham's faithful, since large-scale construction might involve the manipulation of earth or metal elemental energies. Looking next at the classes which might align with Gaasham's faith, I believe that clerics of the Architect would likely be split evenly between the Cloistered, War Priest, and Battle Harbinger doctrines. Similarly, champions would likely be evenly split between the Justice, Redeemer, and Obedience causes. Monks would certainly align with the self-perfection aspect of the faith, while commanders and guardians might align better with the ideas of protection and encouragement of others. Lastly, earth kineticists, and maybe metal kineticists as well, would be invaluable in the construction of great structures, an important idea of focus for Gaasham. Even the Wizards' School of Civic Wizardry could play on this theme. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to think of archetypes which align with Gaasham's teachings. Possibly something like the Student of Perfection, but the lore for that archetype is a bit out of alignment with worshipping Gaasham. If you think of something which fits well, please mention it in the comments below. Brixori, the Wayward Sister. Of the hatchlings who were born before Deific's betrayal and subsequent rampage, only his sister Brixori survived. Even before this tragedy, however, she lived a harsh and unpleasant life. Brixori was born small and slender, noticeably weaker than even her younger siblings. This drew the attention of Deific, who saw her as a target. Brixori became the outlet for much of Deific's fury and scorn prior to his downfall, and he was merciless in his taunting and abuse. Apsu and Sarshallatu failed to intervene sufficiently, perhaps because they were blind to the imperfections of their children. Whatever the reason, no one stood up to defend Brixori, and she slowly withdrew from her family. When Deific finally unleashed Fire and Fang upon his siblings, he failed to notice Brixori hiding away. In his arrogance, he failed to recall the sister he'd so often abused, not even considering her worthy of his violence. Brixori, though, had grown in power, and would continue to do so for the remainder of her life. She abandoned the pursuit of bulk and brawn, and had instead devoted herself to the study of the eldritch and the occult. She became a mistress of shadows, an accomplished ritualist, and an unrivaled weaver of occult magics. In these efforts she found power and meaning, and never again would she be the weak runt, incapable of defending herself. Still, for all her might, Brixori still keeps to the shadows, and the quiet places of the world. Scholarship remains her greatest passion, and she typically uses her magical influence in subtle and invisible ways. Unlike most draconic deities, Brixori spends a large amount of time disguised as a humanoid, taking immense pleasure in wandering the many libraries, archives, and centers of learning which mortals have developed. She's not averse to interacting with mortals in this form, so GMs should feel free to drop her in the background of any scholarly scene as a little cameo. That said, she is notoriously difficult to recognize in this form, so only her most devout and powerful followers should be able to reliably pick her out. Brixori likely has a poor relationship with most of her family members, since her parents failed to stand up for her, and all her other siblings were born after the trauma of Deific's betrayal. The exceptions to this are likely Yluma and Turvu, both of whom are deities of understanding and obscure knowledge. Neither of these gods would be inherently opposed to Brixori's teachings, and as siblings they certainly share a bond. Outside of the Draconic pantheon, Brixori likely has a good or at least working relationship with other deities of magic. Nethys is the most obvious example, but others might include the benevolent Yulral, the family-focused Nalinivati, and most of all the mistress of illusions, Sivana. Brixori might also bear some affection for deities who stand up against the oppressed or the weak, like Chaldira. That said, Chaldira might also get on Brixori's nerves a bit, so I could see that being an on-again, off-again friendship. Meanwhile, Brixori likely gets along poorly with deities of oppression or domination, or any deities who are functionally bullies. This would stem from her abuse at the hands of her hated brother, Deific. Her other brother, Garhaazh, likely fits into this mold, and I can't see them being friendly with one another. Other tyrants, like the misogynistic Asmodeus, likely draw her ire as well, even if she can appreciate his mastery over legal lore. For players interested in playing characters who follow Brixori, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Brixori never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. Her edicts are to pursue knowledge even in the most unusual places, to seek to understand that which cannot be explained, and to show kindness to those who are weaker than the rest. Conversely, to underestimate an enemy or ally, or to treat those weaker than you unkindly, are both anathema to Brixori. Her domains are glyph, introspection, knowledge, and magic. She offers both the heal and harm fonts to her clerics, but provides no divine sanctification. Her holy symbol is a purple tome, studded with precious gems. A wide variety of dragons on Golarion might pay their respects to the Wayward Sister, for her mastery of the eldritch arts is unrivaled. As the patron of occult magic among the draconic deities, any occult dragon might be drawn to her teachings, but certainly none more so than the Sage Dragon, the ultimate scholastic nerd among dragonkind. Despair dragons study the art of causing fear with unparalleled focus, and might turn to Brixori's mastery of magic to inspire their studies. Omen dragons have a connection to esoteric knowledge of the future, and Brixori's teachings might help guide them in developing their methods of interpretation. Even whisper dragons are scholars of a kind, using their vast information networks to gather secrets from across continents, planets, or even entire planes. Beyond the occult dragons, rune dragons are nearly as scholarly as the sage dragons, and thus would fall under Brixori's sway with ease. Similarly, rhyme dragons are unrivaled scholars of biology and anthropology, both fields which would certainly be encouraged in the Wayward Sisters Church. Thinking about the imperial dragons of Tian Sha, the underworld dragon, with its interest in magic and alchemy, might find some benefit in Brixori's faith as well. These dragons, Sage, Despair, Omen, Whisper, Rune, Rhyme, and Underworld, might be ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Brixori. Brixori's sacred colors are purple, black, and silver, and y'all are gonna need to excuse me as I go off about her design for a moment. Look at this artwork. Look at it. She is a dragon with a giant witch's hat, big golden hoop earrings, and magical rings looped onto her head spines. She is absolutely serving, and I am here for it. For this reason, I would argue that followers of Brixori should always be dressed for style points. I'm talking wide-brimmed witches' hats, elaborate piercings, multi-layered flowing dark clothing, and numerous talismans, rings, and other accessories. I'm picturing one part Little Witch Academia, one part Gabriel Piccolo's Raven artwork, and one part that new Pumpkin Spice Witch RPG that's been doing the rounds on Kickstarter. On a more grounded note, followers of Brixori probably gravitate toward flowing robes and scholarly uniforms. They likely have heavy backpacks or satchels full of books and research notes, but also probably tend toward smaller, more slender builds. Brixori's favored weapon is the tail or the star knife. Finally, a dragon who doesn't favor the jaw. The tail strike is a super fun and flavorful option, but I don't see many ways for PCs to gain access to them outside of the whiptail graft item from Howl of the Wild. Maybe you could reflavor that as a magical ability your character has discovered through Brixori's teachings. The Star Knife is a fun and surprising choice here, though plenty of other deities like Desna and the Black Butterfly favor it as well. For a god of magic, the Star Knife is an absolutely fantastic weapon for martial combat, with plenty of traits to take advantage of. Brixori's favored animal is the dragonfly, a fun choice I don't recall seeing before. Followers of the Wayward Sister likely tend toward familiars far more than animal companions, and I could reasonably see insects and arachnids of all kinds, as well as cats, rats, toads, ravens, and owls being common familiar choices among her followers. More advanced options might include the Fey Dragonette, the House Drake, and especially the Calligraphy Wyrm. While members of any ancestry might be drawn to Brixori's faith, especially if they are of a smaller build and an academic persuasion, the small folk, like goblins, gnomes, and halflings, seem like they would find her teachings especially appealing. Smaller ancestries are commonly bullied into subservience in Avestan, and the Wayward Sister could serve to counteract this tendency. I particularly think gnomes might find Brixori's faith appealing, since in addition to defending the weak and the small, she also encourages continuous scholarship, which gnomes could use to stave off the effects of the dreaded bleaching. Because of Brixori's interests in academic study and occult power, a wide variety of classes might be drawn to her faith. Her clerics are almost certainly of the cloistered doctrine, and she likely has vanishingly few champions, except maybe the occasional liberation cause follower who opposes tyrants and bullies. Wizards and maguses could both find plenty of opportunities for arcane study in Brixori's teachings. Bards with the Enigma Muse would align with the ideas of both occultism and careful study, as could psychics with the gathered lore subconscious mind. The Thaumaturge's diverse lore, as well as the Tome Implement and the Scroll Esoterica line of feats, are all on brand for followers of the Wayward Sister. Brixori is known to provide power to oracles, and the lore mystery is the most likely blessing she might bestow upon such agents. Finally, Brixori is likely served by a substantial number of witches. The Resentment is a fantastic patron for those witches, as it aligns with Brixori's own feelings toward her abusive brother and her neglectful parents. Looking next at archetypes, a few stand out. The Ritualist archetype can provide even non-spellcasting characters with access to powerful magic, which is consistent with Brixori's interests. Eldritch researchers promote the idea of studying the occult and esoteric secrets of the great beyond, while lore masters promote a more general knowledge, all of which could be useful and thematic for followers of the Wayward Sister. Garhaazh, the Primal King. Garhaazh was still unhatched at the time of Deihak's rampage, and, like his brother Gaasham, he was born into the shadow of that terrible battle. Unlike the cowardly Gaasham, however, Garhaazh reveled in the destruction and mayhem he witnessed. As he grew, he came to know the conflict between his father and brother, and in it he found the role he would serve. Garhaazh took for himself the title of the Primal King, and declared that he would be the patron of predatory creatures, those who hunt and kill the weak, and take their rightful place at the top of the food chain. Ironically, this assertion on the part of Garhaazh stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding. In his naivete, he assumed that Apsu and Deihak had originally come to blows to decide who was the master of the family, the ruler of the dragon gods. Garhaazh missed the deeper meaning behind the fight, a mistake which he has neglected to correct over the eons. In the early days of the universe, Garhaazh delighted in blowing smoke, and I mean that literally. While he did like bragging about his might and power, he actively produced actual smoke and smog from his breath, which he sent out into the cosmos to obscure the sight of others. This eventually obscured the light of the stars, and someone took notice. From the shadows emerged Cernunnos, the imperial lord of seasons and wild animals, and the son of Erastil. He readied his bow. Garhaazh at first responded with eagerness, for contests of might were his favorite pastime. But when Cernunnos fired his bow and the arrow struck true, the Primal King's excitement turned to confused panic. He'd never conceived of the idea of indirect combat, of fights which could be won without talon, tooth, or sword. How could this trickster hit him from so far away? As he puzzled this out, Garhaazh fled, and hid in a swamp, and the pride emanating off him infused the murky waters with sentience, creating the first bog dragons. Meanwhile, Erastil reached out to his son, Cernunnos, advising him against picking a fight with one so powerful as Garhaazh, and suggesting that he return to more peaceful endeavors. Cernunnos, though, would not be swayed, and he returned to the hunt. Many millennia later, Garhaazh presented himself for battle, and Cernunnos approached. In the intervening years, however, Garhaazh had learned cunning and dishonesty, and this pitched battle was in truth a clever trap. He lured Cernunnos toward a weakness in the fabric of reality. Then, when the time was right, he hurled the Imperial Lord outside of existence, never to be seen again. This was one of the many conflicts which occurred during the War of Immortals. Since then, Garhaazh has set his sights back upon Golarion, and especially the nation of Taldor. I could certainly see his influence leading to the breakout of a second dragon plague, a disaster with which the newly crowned Princess Eutropia would struggle to contend. Garhaazh isn't known for his diplomatic ability or his friendly demeanor, and so his relationships are likely strained. He probably has a poor relationship with most of his siblings, due to his brutality and cruelty, especially with Brixori and Gaasham. He may have a slightly better relationship with Deific, given that the Elder Dragon's rampage inspired Garhaaz's own might makes right worldview. That said, Deific and Garhaazh would likely compete for dominance were they to ever meet and work together, so any alliance would probably be short-lived. Outside of the Draconic pantheon, Garhaazh likely only has good relationships with other like-minded deities of primal magic and nature. Many nature deities on Golarion share his more animalistic and brute force worldview, at least to some extent. Rull, for instance, is the orc god of storms and battle, and he encourages violent and disruptive activities among his faithful. He Feng, the Tian deity of storms, is similar in that he is often a drunken brute with a short temper, who's more than willing to use raw power to get his way. These two deities would likely get along reasonably well with Garhaazh, though He Feng might feel differently when he is sober. Of course, Gozreh is the most widely acknowledged nature deity in the Inner Sea region, and I imagine that his opinion of the Primal King changes with the tides and the weather. The wind and the waves can be violent and chaotic, but she can also be gentle, and in favor of natural balance. And balance is the area where I suspect most nature deities would have an issue with Garhaazh, since he seems to teach no lessons regarding the maintenance of natural ecosystems. Garhaaz's primary focus seems to be on battle, and for that reason I could see the more malevolent and brutal war deities aligning with him. Nulgreth, the orc god of blood and rage, is one such deity, and Zuriel, Apocalypse Rider of War, is another. The late Gorum, may he rest in war, likely would have respected and agreed with many of Garhaaz's beliefs, and any warrior gods who take his place might feel similarly in the years to come. The Primal King is, of course, also interested in rulership, and he likely gets along reasonably well, or at least sees eye to eye with, gods of tyranny. For instance, I could see his followers having much in common with the followers of Izith, the Valkyrie of Hell. Of course, Garhaaz's most fervent enemies are almost certainly the surviving family members of Cernunnos, whom he killed. Erastil is the most active of these deities, and I do not envy the Primal King for having made an enemy of Old Deadeye. Jaidi, the lesser-known Aslanti goddess of agriculture, likely also despises Gozreh, though her faith is less prominent and militant than that of her husband. Finally, the imperial lord Halkamora, who presides over wine and helpful insects, certainly mourns the loss of her brother, though her lesser power compared to Garhaazh would likely prevent her from taking any direct action anytime soon. For players interested in playing characters who follow Garhaazh, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Garhaazh never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. His edicts are to act with mutual brutality, to let might make right, and to always boast of your victories. Conversely, to act with humility, to give mercy without supplication, or to die with grace are all anathema to Garhaazh. His domains are ambition, confidence, dragon, and might, and he has the alternate domains of indulgence, nature, and passion. Clerics of Garhaazh can choose the harm font, and clerics and champions are allowed to choose unholy sanctification, but are not required to do so. His unholy symbol is a crown made from twisting bone or bleached wood. On Golarion, a large number of dragons might be especially willing to serve Garhaazh, or at least act according to his teachings. As the draconic patron of primal magic, it seems reasonable to assume that primal dragons in particular might find him appealing. In truth, the primal dragons are the most animalistic of the four traditions, so there's certainly some accuracy to this assumption. Of the primal dragons, the cinder dragons seem the most vulnerable to Garhaaz's influence, as they have a natural tendency toward violent conquest, greed, and pride. Brine dragons are less inherently violent, but do exist within a strict social hierarchy, and those who forego the worship of the elemental lord Kelizandri may find in Garhaazh an appealing alternative. Magma dragons have a culture based on the idea that might makes right, but they also have a strong belief in the responsibility of leaders for those they govern. A magma dragon who follows the primal king would need to overcome this ingrained dedication. Lastly, adamantine dragons might be prone to Garhaaz's tendencies toward brutality and force, but their appreciation for the performing arts and their extremely patient hunting practices might impose some inner conflict. These dragons, Cinder, Brine, Magma, and Adamantine, might be ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Garhaazh. Garhaaz's sacred colors are brass, gray, and red, a combination I haven't seen before with the other gods I've discussed. While followers might wear these colors in a variety of styles, I suspect they would tend toward clothing which conveys a sense of arrogance and pride. Trophies are likely common accessories among followers of the Primal King, items taken from fallen foes or conquered peoples. Garhaaz's general vibe certainly leads more toward strength and brutality, so I imagine that medium or heavy armor is more common among his followers. Pelts, hides, and leathers are likely more common materials worn among the faithful, while manufactured goods, like worked metal, are likely stolen from others. The Primal King's favorite weapons are Jaws and the Spear, both weapons which feel sufficiently primal to me. I imagine that most followers would be more than willing to wield whatever weapon comes to hand, so long as it doesn't have the agile trait. I really like the idea of a dragon-blooded follower of Garhaazh who wields a spear with reach, then relies on their jaws strike when enemies get in close. Garhaazh has no listed favored animal, which surprised me at first. As a god of primal magic, I would have expected either all animals, like his mother Sarshallatu, or one big bulky animal, like a lion or a bear. I imagine that followers of Garhaazh who employ animal assistants rely on animal companions far more often than familiars. These companions would certainly span animal and magical beasts from all across the animal kingdom, from sharks and orcas in coastal regions to bears and tigers on land, to even eagles in the sky. Really, any living animal companion would work. I can't see followers of Garhaazh having any interest in constructs or undead companions, however. Garhaaz's teachings seem like they would be especially popular among the orcs of Belkzen, a people who've had to build a culture around strength, domination, and hunting for millennia in order to survive. While his faith is not prominent among them that I know of, any orc hold which begins to associate with dragons or dragon-blooded mortals might easily accept it as a part of their culture. I could also see any humanoids who have a connection to the primal elements, earth, wind, fire, water, wood, and metal, coming to accept the faith of Garhaazh as a patron of primal magic, though they would also be drawn to similar deities like the elemental lords, or Gozrah. Clerics of Garhaazh would likely tend toward the war priest or battle harbinger doctrines, due to the faith's emphasis on battle and strength. Similarly, champions of the Primal King would likely be followers of the iniquity or obedience causes, as they attempt to conquer the world around them and enforce their will upon others. Barbarians are especially thematic for this deity, and the elemental, draconic, or animal instincts would all be great options to consider. Rangers fit the themes of Garhaazh as well, especially the flurry or precision instincts. I could see kineticists finding some appeal in the teachings of Garhaazh, especially those who favor the more brute force style blasts to which they have access. Similarly, elemental sorcerers might feel the same draw. Druids, and especially Wild Order druids who specialize in battle forms, are probably the spellcaster with the best connection to the Primal King, though animists, who bond to the Stalker in Darkened Boughs or the Steward of Stone and Fire apparitions, might claim that title as well. Moving over to archetypes, there are a ton of good options to consider. Basically, all the options from Call of the Wild are great here. The Elementalist, Wild Mimic, and Claw Dancer are some examples, but almost anything from that book could work well for followers of the Primal King. Outside of that book, in-your-face combat options seem like an obvious choice, like the Wrestler or the Mauler. That said, Garhaazh specifically learned to fight with traps, tricks, and cunning in his battles with Cernunnos, and so the Trapsmith and Snarecrafter might be thematic options as well. Yluma, the Living Page. Yluma was born after the betrayal of Deific, and she seems to have no meaningful memories of that terrible event. Upon her birth, it became apparent that Yluma was different from her siblings. Though all dragons held some innate magical power, Yluma contained within her a vast ocean of untapped magical energy. From the very beginning, she could unleash this magic to undertake acts of creation rivaled only by her parents. All this power, however, came with a catch. Iluma's physical form was insufficient to contain the eldritch forces within her. With each arcane exertion, the magic stretched and strained her body, pulling it apart and reforming it into a new and less defined shape. Yluma grew increasingly concerned as this process went on, and she soon feared that she would be reduced to nothingness by her own powers. She begged her father for a solution, and Apsu admitted that he did not know how to solve her problem. He suggested, however, that she seek out her mother, for the infinite magic within Yluma reminded him of Sarshallatu's own infinite self. And so Yluma set out. She searched the great beyond, looking high and low for the mother who had abandoned them to grieve. Throughout her journey, she faced numerous dangers and threats, for threats exist in the great beyond which challenge even the gods. All these hardships Yluma overcame, using her innate magic to drive away threats and surpass obstacles. Finally, she arrived. Yluma found Sarshallatu in a dark corner of reality, and she looked upon the mother she had never known. Even now, Sarshallatu's vastness was too much to take in. She was, for all intents and purposes, infinite. Yluma then looked back upon her own exhausted form. Her muscles were sore, her skin split by magic, her bones broken and re-knitted. And yet, the power within her remained as vast and limitless as ever. It eked out of her even now, creeping through the cracks in her physical form. Then she had a flash of insight. If the magic was of her, even if it was infinite, it could be used to bolster her own form. She traced her claws over the scars and cracks on her body, and the magic followed behind. Runes formed across her skin, reinforcing and rebuilding her flesh so that it could contain the powers which flowed through it. All her knowledge and experience she scrawled onto her scales, creating a record of all that she had seen, done, and learned. And when she returned to her family, she was whole again. She had become the living page. Yluma harnessed her innate magic to become the patron of the arcane dragons, and more broadly to all those who had innate magic which sought to escape from them. She is likely the reason that many arcane dragons have physiologies which are nonsensical without the involvement of magic, for she is likely the one who shaped their bodies to channel their innate magic in ways which the body would not otherwise have been able to contain. Within her family, Yluma likely has a reasonably close relationship with both her parents, since she trusted Apsu to help her in the first place, then relied on Sarshallatu's lesson to restore her. She also likely gets along well with Brixori, since both have a respect for and obsession with magic, despite deriving their magical powers from different sources. She likely also gets along with Turvu, who is similarly curious about the nature of their innate power. Outside of the Draconic pantheon, Yluma is likely on good terms with other deities of magic, or runes. Nethys is the obvious example, but other examples might include Lissala, Nalinivati, Yulral, and even Kols or Magrim. That said, this friendliness would likely stop with deities who prefer to keep magical knowledge secret, like Sivana. Gods of secrecy in general, like Norgorber, would likely annoy or even anger her. Similarly, gods of tyranny who actively suppress information and acceptance, like Asmodeus, would earn her ire as well. I expect that her most complicated relationship might be with Lamashtu, the mother of monsters. Lamashtu is known to bestow monstrous boons upon both her followers and those born to them. She and her faithful see these boons as gifts, sources of power and uniqueness. The acceptance of things which make you unique and which grant you power is certainly aligned with Iluma's ideals, but I imagine that the imposition of these powers upon those who did not ask for them might rub her the wrong way. I would really like to see this relationship explored in future books. For players interested in playing characters who follow Yluma, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Yluma never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. Her edicts are to celebrate your victories and losses, to embrace your unique strengths and innate gifts, and to nurture the flame of acceptance and knowledge in others. Conversely, to intentionally mislead people away from understanding themselves, to repeatedly deny who you are, and to treat your gifts as a curse are all anathema to Yluma. She has the domains of confidence, glyph, magic, and truth, and the alternate domains of knowledge and perfection. She offers the heal font to her clerics, and clerics and champions of Yluma can select holy sanctification, but are not required to do so. Her holy symbol is a white dragon scale, with a feather quill which is etching script upon the scale. Yluma is the patron of the arcane dragons in the Great Beyond, and a number of these dragons might be especially aligned with Iluma's story and her personal teachings. Barrage dragons, for instance, are naturally infused with tremendous amounts of magical energy, and this energy distorts their body and requires an outlet. This parallels Iluma's own personal history, and benevolent barrage dragons could easily follow her teachings to gain a sense of purpose and a direction for their lives. Mirage dragons are similar, but might struggle with the idea of not misleading others until they learn to use their illusions responsibly. Rune dragons inscribe the magical knowledge they gather onto their scales, paralleling Iluma's own process for recording her achievements. Wish dragons are imbued with tremendous magical potential, with the ability to grant increasingly powerful wishes to targets they choose. Outside of the arcane dragons, omen dragons might be drawn to Iluma's faith as a means of interpreting their oracular powers. These dragons, Barrage, Mirage, Rune, Wish, and Omen, might be the ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Yluma. Iluma's sacred colors are gold and silver, with her apparently having taken after her father. Rather than wear these colors to the exclusion of others, I suspect that devout Illumans would express their faith with accessories and clothing items which are inscribed with runes and other arcane glyphs. Yluma herself has arcane marks inscribed directly upon her scales, so magical or symbolic tattoos might be common among her faithful. Iluma's favored weapons are the jaws and the kakarna. The kakarna is a long staff, tipped with a metallic hoop, upon which are hung a collection of smaller rings also made from metal. Here on Earth, they are sometimes carried by Buddhist monks. If you're familiar with Naruto, both Jubito and Hagoromo wield a kakarna at the end of the war arc. Because of Iluma's association with magical characters, I suspect that her primarily spellcaster followers would likely wield magical staffs simply flavored as kakarnas, rather than wielding the kakarna weapon in terms of mechanics. This is such a niche weapon, and I'm really glad that Paizo took this opportunity to use it. Iluma's favored animal is the snake, and specifically all non-venomous snakes. This might include powerful apex or near-apex predators, like the anaconda, the boa, or the python, but might also include smaller creatures like the green snake, the rat snake, or even the king snake. This opens up options for both familiars and animal companions. I could also see advanced familiar options like the fey dragonette, the house drake, and especially the calligraphy wyrm being popular, just like with Brixori. Iluma's teachings might appeal to elemental or planar scions in particular, since they are imbued with magic from far-off places, which cause alterations to their bodies. The teachings of the living page might give them a sense of purpose, self-acceptance, or belonging. Similarly, any ancestry or heritage seen as monstrous by others might find the same level of comfort. This might include the flesh warp, the hunger seed, the beastkin, and any number of others. A wide variety of classes might be represented among Iluma's followers. Her clerics are likely followers of the cloistered doctrine, more than any other doctrine. At the same time, champions of the living page are likely pretty rare. Yluma is broadly accepted as a patron of all sorcerers, though those whose bloodlines access the arcane spell list might be even more aligned with her teachings. Similarly, oracles of any mystery might find Iluma's teachings especially enlightening on their search for mastery and acceptance over their curse. The runesmith, when it officially debuts later this year, would likely find some parallels to Iluma's process of script writing upon her own scales. When Yluma chooses to act as a witch's patron, I suspect she would most frequently manifest as the inscribed one. On the martial side of things, I could definitely see draconic or elemental instinct barbarians seeking out Yluma's faith to understand and channel their innate power in constructive ways. Thinking a bit more about the idea of arcane runes and writing, wizards belonging to either the Ars Grammatica school or the Rune Lord class archetype could connect to that idea as well. Moving on to the archetypes, the most obvious to consider for the faithful of Yluma is the Wellspring Mage, the Pathfinder interpretation of the classic wild magic caster. Similarly, any archetype which represents magical power which must be channeled or carefully controlled could be especially thematic. This might include the Were-Creature, the Living Vessel, or the Curse Maelstrom, among others. Lastly, the idea of recording knowledge and experiences on one's own skin calls to mind the Tattooed Historian, though you might need to get permission from your GM to access that archetype if you aren't playing a Belkzen orc. Turvu, the Shifting Plane. Turvu was the last of Apsu and Sarshallatu's children to hatch, or at least the last one we know about at this time. When Apsu and Sarshallatu were forming their children, a process over which they had some control, they chose to form one who would be infused not just with divinity, but with the very nature of divinity itself, and who would be driven to study and understand this nature at its foundational level. The result of this decision was Turvu. Turvu grew up in the aftermath of Deific's betrayal, and the chaos and pain which this caused within the Draconic family forced them to flee. This tension caused Turvu to question the underlying disagreements at play. What were the fundamental differences between good and evil? What are the fundamental differences between law and chaos? This line of questioning led them to further questions. What is the nature of the planes of existence, and why are they separate? Are these differences fundamental or arbitrary? And are the differences between ideologies and moralities differentiated in the same way? To seek answers, Turvu set out across the great beyond. They moved from plane to plane, studying the nature of each level of existence and learning to appreciate the distinct perspectives each one offered, and the forms of beauty which arose in each. In doing so, Turvu began to change. Their bodies shifted and evolved, taking on the traits of each plane they visited. Eventually, Turvu became so adaptable that their form could shift to match any plane they entered, and their mind pushed itself to new heights of awareness, becoming capable of transcending planar divisions and existing in multiple dimensions at once. This earned them the moniker, the Shifting Plane. This led to the final question, which Turvu seeks to answer even to this day. What is divinity, and from where does divine power originate? The gods themselves are manifestations of power and intent, but where did this power come from before the gods existed? Turvu acknowledges that divine power is not internal, and therefore they do not consider themselves worthy of worship, in the same way that they do not consider any deities worthy of worship. This is a unique perspective among the deities I've examined on this channel so far. This perspective on divinity, the idea that the gods are not particularly special or worthy of worship, likely irritates or offends many gods. I struggle to think of gods who would readily befriend Turvu, though several might seek them out to better understand their perspective. Nethys, for example, along with other gods of magic, might question Turvu and attempt to learn from their experiences, so they might better wield their own divine powers. Pharasma, commonly accepted as the first among the gods, may find Turvu to be an interesting conversation partner, and might be able to provide them with some answers regarding the beginning of divinity. Lastly, Turvu's brother, Otilaz, is himself a living contradiction. He very well might delight in picking his sibling's brain about the nature of existence and perspective. I imagine that self-made deities, in particular, might struggle to get along with Turvu. Irori is the prime example of this, since he actively pursued self-perfection, and ascended to divinity after having achieved it. From some points of view, Irori's story contradicts Turvu's entire thesis, since his divinity seems to have been earned. His nephew Gruhashta is similar, having ascended to power after penning a book of perfect knowledge. While I doubt that Irori or Gruhashta would ever strike out at Turvu in anger, I could certainly see them dismissing their arguments out of hand and receiving them with hostility or irritation. That said, they are both pretty chill, so they might simply be amused at what they see as a misguided attempt at understanding. For players interested in playing characters who follow Turvu, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Turvu never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. Their edicts are to travel and explore the world and other planes, and to seek to understand all sides of a conflict. Conversely, to deem anything purely good or evil without first seeking context, and to remain stagnant in the pursuit of exploration or knowledge are both anathema to Turvu. Their domains are freedom, introspection, knowledge, and travel, though they also have the alternate domains of dragon and perfection. They offer clerics access to both the heal and harm fonts, and clerics and champions can choose either holy or unholy sanctification, but are not required to do so. Their holy symbol is a multifaceted crystal, reflecting various colors of light. Of the many divine dragons, of which Turvu serves as the divine patron, the Resurrection and Requiem dragons certainly seem the most likely to come to an understanding with Turvu. Requiem dragons gain an understanding of the nature of life and death as they grow, learning to accept when death is inevitable, and the importance of accepting the whims of fate which are bigger than us. Resurrection dragons, meanwhile, tread the line between life and death, healing the living one day and raising undead minions the next. Both these draconic subtypes exist outside of conventional morality structures, and might therefore be drawn to Turvu's teachings and unique perspective. Similarly, among the imperial dragons of Tian Sha, the sky dragons are seen as the messengers between the gods and the mortal dragons. I could easily see a sky dragon being drawn to the faith of Turvu, especially since their connection to the plane of metal was severed and only recently came back into existence. Shifting gears slightly, the phase dragons are perfectly suited to Turvu's teachings surrounding the exploration of the planes. Phase dragons are naturally driven to run and travel, using their sleek frames and teleportation magic to explore nations, planets, solar systems, and even entire planes. Lastly, omen dragons might rely on Turvu's teachings to help them make sense of their strange prophetic powers, which often require the right context and perspective to understand. These dragons, Resurrection, Requiem, Sky, Phase, and Omen, might be ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Turvu. Turvu's sacred color is white, and that fact, along with their shifting scales, immediately reminds me of Saruman, declaring himself Saruman of the many colors with his scintillating garments. Realistically, I could see Turvu's vanishingly few followers dressing in garments which seem to change color with the environment, be it through magical means or simply effectively woven and dyed fabric. Equipment enchantments which allow for protection against environmental effects and elemental damage are likely common among these followers. Turvu's sacred weapon are the claws and the staff. Hey, look at that, the second draconic deity who doesn't favor the jaws. Claws are fairly easy for characters to obtain, at least compared to a tail strike, and so might be employed with some regularity. The staff is well suited for both travel and combat, and is a common option among deities of travel. I could also see the shifting property rune being popular among followers of the shifting plane. Just like Yluma and Garhaazh, Turvu has no favored animal. This is surprising to me, as animals are commonly employed as traveling companions. Perhaps it is an extension of Turvu not seeing themselves as worthy of worship, and thus not encouraging their followers to think themselves worthy of commanding an animal. I could see followers of Turvu acquiring familiars from their planar visits, such as elemental scamps, elemental wisps, or imps. They might also gravitate toward generically magical familiars, like the Spell Slime or the Aeon Weird. I don't see many ancestries which would have an immediate innate draw toward Turvu's teachings. Planar or elemental scions, however, especially those whose powers are misaligned with their surrounding culture, might seek out Turvu's guidance. A celestial Nephilim born in Cheliax or Nidal, for instance, might seek the higher perspectives of Turvu to accept their powers and how they might fit into or escape their native society. Clerics dedicated to Turvu are likely split between the cloistered and war priest doctrines, since cloistered clerics would be better at studying, while war priest doctrines are likely better at defending themselves in their travels. Battle harbingers feel a little too violent for a deity like Turvu, who emphasizes understanding. I could see kineticists, and especially multi-element kineticists, having a strong affection for the shifting plane. Bards, except for those with the battle muse, seem well suited to the process of exploring other societies and cultures and appreciating their perspectives. Rangers, and especially outwit rangers, are similar, with a greater emphasis on exploration of wild terrain. In situations where Turvu acts as a patron for witches, I could see them acting as either the paradox of opposites or the faith's flamekeeper patron. The best archetype for followers of Turvu is almost certainly the Geomancer, a whole archetype dedicated to taking advantage of a character's immediate surroundings and using them to feed one's own magical power. The linguist might be ideal for characters who need to learn the spoken languages of a variety of cultures across the Great Beyond. Similarly, the Horizon Walker is a fantastic option for followers of the Shifting Plane who find themselves exploring hazardous or strange terrain. Otilaz, the One of All. Finally, we come to Otilaz, the unborn child of Apsu and Sarshallatu. When Deific betrayed his family, he killed many of his unborn siblings. One egg, though, he raised high in his claws and brought it down upon his father's head. From the shattered eggshell fell a ruined corpse, Otilaz. When Sarshallatu fled the battle, the image of her broken child's body remained in her mind's eye, and she grieved. Over the millennia, that memory refined as her grief focused. Otilaz was not merely one of Sarshallatu's many children. Otilaz was to have been her greatest child, a perfect child, a child which would have recontextualized all of creation by its very existence, bringing meaning to all. For all her complaints about Apsu, Sarshallatu also places way too much unasked-for responsibility upon her children. And yet, the quintessence, the soul stuff which would have made up Otilaz, took note of Sarshallatu's grief. This quintessence looked upon the mortal form it was meant to inhabit, and it realized something. The mother who had birthed it was still mourning. The father who would have raised it was still horrified. How could these two infinite beings feel so strongly over something, someone, who was never born? And in that moment, Otilaz understood, and thus Otilaz was. It manifested into existence, finding a place for itself as the god of entropy, decay, and the slow passage of time, and the promise of mysteries not yet understood. Otilaz both exists and never existed, and in Otilaz, both those statements can be true. This inherent contradiction is something of a thought hazard to the many psychopomps who serve Pharasma, as seeing and acknowledging Otilaz is known to drive them mad. This madness inevitably leads to the psychopomp's destruction, and their evolution into a Sakhil. On Golarion, the faith of Otilaz is most often practiced in Geb, the undead nation in eastern Garund. The faith there is led by a character who should be familiar to longtime viewers of the channel, Keramoros, the undead dragon who was driven from her home on the Isle of Terror by Tar-Baphon. Keramoros has acquired a mysterious tome called the Sorrows of Sarshallatu, the only known written source for the story of Otilaz and its teachings. How the Ravener might intend to wield this faith against the Whispering Tyrant is still unknown. Otilaz likely has vanishingly few allies, due to its tendency to exist only on the fringes of existence. That said, as a god of alchemy, its followers might align easily with other gods of alchemy. The most prominent of these is likely Laudinmio, the elemental lord of metal and the patron of the alchemical arts. Other deities associated with alchemy include the demon lord Hagenti, Brai, and to a lesser extent the Blackfingers aspect of Norgorber, or possibly Chi-Jon. Otilaz is likely opposed to deities of enlightenment, like Irori or Gruhashta, seeing their supposed quest for understanding and perfection as an exercise in folly. This animosity may or may not extend to deities of learning and knowledge, depending on their outlook. Those who consider themselves masters of their craft will likely draw Otilaz's ire, while those who consider learning to be an ongoing process which is never done will likely find Otilaz far more friendly. Similarly, deities of undeath might find themselves in opposition to Otilaz, especially those who consider undeath to be a path toward immortality. Urgathoa and Zura are the primary examples of this, but plenty of other undead deities would fall into this category as well. At the intersection of immortality and mastery of knowledge are several deities and organizations. Nin, for instance, is the patron deity of vampiric perfection, who strives for scientific perfection and idealized existence. The esoteric order of the Palatine Eye encourages members to study the secret knowledge of the universe, with the intention of mastering this knowledge and ascending to enlightened divinity upon death. The Whispering Way seeks to master the skills of undeath to allow members to ascend to immortality through lichdom and bring about a dead world without end. Even Sangpochi, the central Tian religion focused on meditation and reincarnation, focuses on the quest for enlightenment, and thus might act in opposition to Otilaz. Notably, the extent to which Otilaz would actively oppose those who see things differently is unclear. I could easily see Otilaz simply allowing those who oppose it to go about their business unopposed, simply considering them to be misguided souls. By far, Otilaz's most compelling relationship for me is that which it shares with Pharasma. Otilaz has made an unintentional habit of corrupting and destroying Pharasma's psychopomps, and yet the Lady of Graves has taken no action. As the founding deity of this iteration of the universe, Pharasma is likely the one deity who might be able to understand Otilaz's unique form of existence, as well as their perspective on inevitability and pointlessness. There are even some theories among Yamaraja scholars that Otilaz might play an important divine role as a counterpoint to Pharasma. This theory might associate Otilaz with the Watcher, Yog-Sothoth, the elder god who is commonly seen as Pharasma's opposite in the grand cosmic equation. For players interested in playing characters who follow Otilaz, here are a few useful details. Unfortunately, for those using the alignment rules, Otilaz never had an alignment listing in 1E or 2E. Its edicts are to learn from observed mistakes, to promote change and growth, and to accept the inevitable. Conversely, to seek immortality or enlightenment, to become stagnant, and to believe yourself a learned master are all anathema to Otilaz. Its domains are change, death, introspection, and soul, though it also has the alternate domains abomination, dragon, and sorrow. It provides both the heal and harm fonts to its clerics, and clerics and champions can choose either holy or unholy sanctification, but are not required to do so. Its holy symbol is an eye surrounded by a draconic Ouroboros. This symbol is consistent with alchemical iconography on Golarion. Both Requiem and Resurrection dragons might find some appeal in the teachings of Otilaz. Requiem dragons must, as part of their growth into adulthood, accept the nature of death and the important role it plays in the universe. Resurrection dragons, meanwhile, exercise more control over life and death, but eschew the conventional structures of morality in doing so. Both Time and Omen dragons also possess gifts which might lead them to the teachings of Otilaz. Both must learn to accept that which is inevitable. Time dragons because of their ability to travel and influence the flow of time, and Omen dragons because of their ability to foresee the future. These dragons, Requiem, Resurrection, Time, and Omen, might be the ideal draconic sources for dragon-related characters who follow Otilaz. Otilaz's sacred colors are black, white, red, and blue, colors which can be divided into two opposing pairs, black as the opposite of white, and red as the opposite of blue. I imagine that this contrast is the intended message for Otilaz's followers, and yet the existence of four colors adds a layer of complexity not seen in the faith of Nethys, who favors only black and white. There's likely deeper meaning to be found here, where the blending of these four elements allows for a variety of combinations which do not necessarily contrast so sharply as their component parts do at first glance. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how followers of Otilaz would dress. They might favor alchemical tools like vials and goggles, but that would likely be limited to followers who practice the alchemical arts. Otilaz's favored weapons are the jaws and the mace. These, however, seem somewhat arbitrary. I guess the mace might call back to how Otilaz was smashed against the head of its father when it was still an egg, but that seems like a bit of a stretch. I could see a number of other weapons being common among followers, including alchemical bombs, magical staves, and even reaper scythes. Otilaz's favored animal is the Amphisbaena. In alchemy and lore, this is a term which refers to a worm or snake with a head on either end of its body. In the real world, this term instead refers to a classification of worms. I'm not entirely certain which definition the rules are referring to, though I suspect it is the former. Other familiar options for followers of Otilaz might include the homunculus, the talking head, the old friend, or the animate hand. While Otilaz doesn't encourage immortality through undeath in its followers, I could see them employing undead servants and familiars without violating their god's teachings. Otilaz's connection to the cycle of life and death might draw the attention of mortal Duskwalkers on Golarion. Duskwalkers go through a strange life cycle, incarnating when another of their kind dies. They bear a connection to Pharasma and her psychopomps, and so might feel the same call toward Otilaz that those servitors do. On a different note, flesh warps created by alchemy might be drawn to the faith of Otilaz as they learn about their origins, since it is a god of alchemy in addition to its more existential interests. Lastly, consider that the faith of Otilaz is most actively practiced in Geb. For that reason, Dhampirs, changelings, skeletons, or any undead ancestry might come into contact with the faith with a higher degree of frequency. Looking next at the class options, clerics of Otilaz likely gravitate toward the cloistered doctrine, relying on magic and study to improve their understanding of the world. For similar reasons, champions of Otilaz are likely very rare. Sorcerers of the undead or psychopomp bloodlines might find Otilaz's perspectives on fate and death a refreshing and enlightening view, and the same might be said of summoners with the undead or psychopomp eidolons. Alchemists and investigators with the alchemical sciences methodology might also be drawn to the teachings of Otilaz, for similar reasons to the flesh warp I described a moment ago. Finally, oracles with either the Blight or the Time mysteries might relate to Otilaz's dominion over impermanence and the changing nature of reality. Looking at archetypes which might be found among followers of Otilaz, I think the herbalist could be a good option, since it gives characters access to alchemy, albeit from a more naturalistic perspective. Meanwhile, both the Exorcist and the Hallowed Necromancer might fit members of the faith who seek to stop undead beings who are using their undeath to achieve immortality, or spread such a state to others. The Essence Dancers. Alright, we're almost done, but there is one more element of Draconic faith to discuss. There exists among the dragon gods a pantheon focusing on the 4 magical traditions. This is the Essence Dancer Pantheon, a collection of 4 of the Draconic siblings, Brixori, Garhaazh, Turvu, and Yluma. Each of these deities are the Draconic patron of one of the magical traditions, occult, primal, divine, and arcane, respectively. As a pantheon, they focus on the sharing of perspectives, to explore new ideas, and learn the truths of existence. This pantheon only recently came to prominence in the Mwangi Expanse region of central Garund. At the Magambia, scholars specialize in the study of primal and arcane magic, unraveling the mysteries of the matter essence and its interactions with both the mind and life essences. The Tiralu dwarves, meanwhile, worship dragons as divine beings, and are familiar with the Draconic pantheon. Crossover between these groups led to the formation of a new magical theory, postulating that worshipping the 4 Draconic patrons of magic might lead to a greater understanding of the 4 essences which make up the traditions, and the differences and similarities between them. The edicts of the Essence Dancers are to pursue fundamental truths, to compare your experience to that of others, and to investigate new solutions. Conversely, to become stagnant or passive in your thinking, to abandon magic, and to sequester useful discoveries or valuable information are all anathema to the Essence Dancers. Their domains are creation, dragon, knowledge, and magic, though they also have the alternate domains of nature and secrecy. They provide the heal or harm fonts to their clerics, but offer no divine sanctification. Notably, their favored weapons are the claws or the tekokagi, a weapon which is essentially just wearable claws. Followers of the Essence Dancers likely tend to be spellcasters, or at least experts on one of the 4 magical traditions. While followers might practice magic of any tradition, they will likely attempt to partner up with partners who practice an opposed tradition. Arcane and Divine, for instance, are opposed traditions, and between them they cover all 4 essences of magic. For more information on the 4 essences and the traditions of magic in general, check out the collab video I made back in February with Jake from Wisdom Check. Sources and additional reading. If you want to do any additional reading on the topic of the Draconic gods, then it's actually quite simple. Basically, all of the information for this video came from the Lost Omens Draconic Codex, which is essentially the only source for all these deities. Only Sarshallatu has even been mentioned outside of this book, and even then only briefly in Divine Mysteries. If you have any interest in Pathfinder as a system, I highly recommend the Draconic Codex. It's one of the best books Paizo has put out in years, and I've loved reading it. Well, that's it. I've officially run out of Draconic deities to talk about. I originally started these videos intending to do 1 video each covering Apsu and Deific. Obviously, that spun way out of control and got away from me, but hey, that's about par for the course at this point. My next video will be delving back into a campaign which is very close to my heart. Up next, the What Happened In series makes its triumphant return, with my summary of Curse of the Crimson Throne, the first AP I ever ran and the one that got my wife into Pathfinder. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.